try to,
Right.
got it. I'm just going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. And at the end, my contact information will be on the final screen. So if anybody has any questions or things that they would like to talk about, I would encourage you to send me an email. I've already got one Zoom meeting set up for Monday with one of you. So I'm looking forward to that. But let's just jump right into this. I am Dr. Mike. I founded the company called ExecuSpec Leadership Development, where we exist to develop successful executives by improving leadership perspectives. And we do that by identifying needs for changes in human behavior. And the way we do that is with the assessment that most of you had taken, and I hope that you got the results emailed back. And so essentially what we do is we identify the primary behaviors that flow from personality, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of vital competencies that define transformational and servant leadership. But we also talk about the frequency with which personality actually interferes with these competencies, and I'll unpack that in just a little bit. But the first thing that I want to start with is this statistic that came out in April of this year from Gallup.com, where they said 79% of workers don't trust their leaders. That is a massive gap. That is pretty big. Now, I would imagine that there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Tyrannical leaders, dishonest leaders, so on and so forth. But the majority of people that don't trust their leaders, they don't trust their leaders for one simple fact: they don't feel like they connect with them. They just don't have this ability, or the leader doesn't have the ability to connect with them on a relational level. And it all boils down to communication. So our equation just looks like this. Leadership comes from healthy relationship, and healthy relationships come from effective communication. And I'm going to tell you something that's probably not the most profound thing that you're going to hear all day, but we only communicate in two ways. It's either words or actions. What we say, how we say it, and of course, the things that we do. And all of that has an impact on the people that we are in relationships with, whether personal or professional. So it begs the question, why the 79% chasm? Why is this gap so big? Well, I'm gonna take you back to some ancient texts. And the first one comes from The Art of War. I'm sure you've heard of The Art of War from Sun Tzu. Now, let's just bear in mind that he's dealing with war. We're not dealing with war. We're dealing with a professional context. So the first thing that he writes here is, he says, it's easy to love your friend, but sometimes the hardest lesson to learn is to love your enemy. Now, in a leadership context, in a business context, we don't like the word enemy, but what we're talking about are people that are opposed to us or opposite us. And when we talk about loving, we're talking about, how do we influence people? How do we get people from not only a place where they are, where you need them to be, if you're a leader or just, some influencer to some degree, or getting them to be. It just really comes down to the idea that we have to influence them. And so what he goes on to say is, he challenges this: engage people with what they expect. It's what they're able to discern and confirms their projections. It settles them into predictable patterns of behavior of response, occupying their minds while you wait for the extraordinary moment, that which they cannot anticipate. Obviously, once again, he's talking about war, but the operative phrase here is engage people with what they expect. Engaging people with what they expect. Now, this is not new information. There's a tactic in sales, in psychotherapy, and even hostage negotiations that they call mirroring. It's essentially just mimicking the behavior of another person so that we can effectively influence them. And for those of you who are in sales, you understand that people buy from people they trust and they like. And so how do we get people to move closer to us? Well, the answer to that is we move closer to them. Here's another ancient writing coming from the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 22. Paul, the writer of this, was a missionary. He was a very successful missionary. And so he was explaining why he was so successful. And here's what he said: to the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means, I might save some. This is a fascinating connection between Sun Tzu and this missionary named Paul, where he recognized that if I'm going to influence people, if I'm going to connect with people and get them to become the best version of themselves, I have to be like them. This is a very interesting concept. And the reason for that is because we view the world through the lenses of our own personality. Our obstacles, our challenges, opportunities, we all tend to see these things from our own personality. But here's the way we need to understand it. Extroverts, introverts, very different, obviously. Extroverts see the world as something to be conquered. Introverts see the world as something to be understood. Real quick example, I am one of those extroverts. I'm sure you're picking up that already with the intensity and the passion with which I speak. But as an extrovert, if I were walking along a path and I saw a board laying on the ground and there was a nail just tacked into it and a hammer laying there, I would see that as a problem. And I would pick up that hammer and I would drive that nail in because clearly the nail needs to be in the wood. However, if an introverted person happened by, they would see the nail, they would see the hammer, they'd begin asking questions. Why is this here? What happened to the worker? What was going on? What's the project that's taking place? The thing that we need to understand is everything that we do flowing from our personality is going to be very different from people around us. It's teamwork. Teamwork is how we come together to create success, but we need to know that success is by skill, not personality. This is important because one of the things that I think leaders fail to do is to understand the proper application of the word authenticity. Where I see so many leaders fail when we work with our clients is they say things like, I got to be me, I got to keep it real, you can love me or hate me, you can take me or leave me, I'm just going to be who I am. That is a very ineffective way of influencing people, because the reality is success comes not by your worldview, but by how the world views you, how people see us, how they accept us, how they choose to be followers. Because let's face it, just because you're a leader doesn't mean they have to follow. People reject leaders all the time. So let's move into this a little bit further. One of the things that we, as Christy already pointed out, that transformational and servant leadership are two leadership styles that we absolutely press into. And they are contrary to any leadership style that flows naturally from personality. And when we can master transformational and servant leadership, we will possess the power of persuasion. We call it counterintuitive leadership, and I'll explain that in just a few minutes. Let's get into this. The journey to success has two paths. The first path is what we would call the how, and the second path is what we'd call the why. So if you're in a business, let's say you're a business owner and you want to become, if you're, I don't know, let's just create a name. You are the ABC Widget Making Corporation. And you say, hey, we want to be the best widget making company in the world. How do we become that? Well, studies tell us that if you lay out that plan on how to become the greatest widget making company in the world, that you will see an increase of 10%. However, the other path, the why path, says that you will enjoy a 90% increase in how you develop and where you go. But here's what I would suggest to you. While the how is important, how do we get to where we need to be? Put a goal out there. You've got the actionable steps. You've got your 3-year strategic plan. All of that is well and good. But if our why is not applied correctly, we could be in trouble. The why has to be counterintuitive. And by that, I mean, it's one thing to have your how goal. But if our why says, why do we exist as a corporation? You will easily revert back to the how. Why do we exist as a company? Well, we exist to be the greatest widget making company in the world. Well, how do we do that? Now we've gone from 90% back down to 10%. So it begs the question, what is a counterintuitive why? A counterintuitive why takes the why off of the corporation and puts it on the individual. So as a leader, I have to say, why do I exist in this company? It is a goal that puts people above personal and professional success. It says, okay, I know what our how is. I know what our goal is, but I need to turn my back on the goal because I don't want the goal to become the God. I want the people with whom I work and the people that I lead to be my primary focus, that my priority. And when I can do that, now I can create a successful organization through teamwork. There has never been an organization that has reached a level of success by one single individual. It is a teamwork. Now, here's an interesting study that I want to bring out to you. Every company represented in this room has only three problems. Every obstacle, every challenge, every opportunity that you're going to face in the future falls under one of these three categories: people, process, or profit. But there was a study that came out in the Wall Street Journal just a few years ago that took this pie chart, and they said they reported on a study that was conducted. I have no idea who conducted this study, but they said, we want to know why organizations who have started, enjoyed a measure of success, and then either began to decrease or outright closed. They wanted to know what the reasons were. And here's what they found. 46% of those businesses failed to invest into leadership skills. They failed to improve the skills of the people within that organization. 11% were just a lack of experience. That's pretty good news. And then the remaining 43% was just a variety of everything else. So the largest culprit negatively impacting business today are organizations that fail to understand what true and effective leadership is, which I'll go back to is healthy relationships built off of effective communication. Now, of all of the leadership styles out there, you can Google them today. I can promise you that they will all fall under these two approaches to leadership. Either you're going to be an exclusively personality leader, in other words, approaching every opportunity and challenge based on what flows from you naturally, or you will be a counterintuitive leader. So I want to just spend the time that we have together unpacking both of these leadership approaches. Now, if you're familiar at all with the four temperaments, Dr. Carl Jung, the Swedish psychiatrist, I think he passed away in the early 60s. He's the one that gave us these two terms, introvert and extrovert. And the temperaments, if you were to Google them, and I'll just be honest with you, I have no idea where these words come from, but if you Googled the four temperaments, this is what you're going to find. If you are an extrovert, you're either a cleric, which is a very strong, very goal-oriented, very task-driven individual, or you're a sanguine. You're very charismatic. You're likely a salesperson. On the introverted side, you're either a phlegmatic or a melancholy. Phlegmatic being very structured. Give me the bullet points. Tell me what you want to do and tell me how to do it, and I'll follow those steps to a T. Melancholy, very laissez-faire in their approach to relationships, very hands-off, very laid back. Now, there are actionable steps that flow from these temperaments. Of course, the cleric being very dominant, the sanguine being very compelling, the phlegmatic very structured, and the melancholy being very permissive, very, very hands-off kind of approach. But there's another one in there called transactional. Now, our studies find that if you are an extroverted sanguine person and you engage in transaction, you're going to be all about incentive, whether tangible or intangible. You're going to either inspire people to a greater tomorrow through your experiences or offer some kind of an incentive to get somebody to be productive. The phlegmatic transactional person is going to be more about compromise. Now, I would tell you that everybody in this room can see yourself on this screen somewhere. You can recognize who you are, but I would tell you that Dr. Carl Jung gave us some very interesting counsel on this, and he said that nobody is purely one and none of the other. And in fact, he said, and these are his words, not mine, if you find that person, they're likely confined to an insane asylum. And the reason for that is because we have this human need to be situationally aware. So in other words, we will adjust our behaviors according to the situation, and they can cross over into the other side. But here's what I would tell you. We have to be very cautious in doing that because in many cases, crossing over from being an introvert to an extrovert or extrovert to an introvert can strike the people that you're communicating with as very inauthentic and not very true to yourself. So there is a way that we can go about doing this that actually wins people. And that is through what we call counterintuitive leadership. Counterintuitive leadership is defined by these two leadership styles. The first one is transformational leadership. What is transformational leadership? It is the continual transformation of an organization by continually transforming its people. In other words, these leaders, these people have a unique ability to raise the effectiveness of those around them. The greatest modern example that I can think of this is in Tom Brady, quarterback for the New England Patriots for 20 years. He leaves New England and goes to Tampa Bay. By the way, the year before he went there, they had one of the worst records in the NFL. And Tom Brady was suffering a 4-game suspension because of some deflate gate, whatever that was going on. But yet he managed to come in the 5th week and lead that team to a Super Bowl. How does that happen? Because Tom Brady has a very unique ability to raise the effectiveness of those around him. He didn't do that by himself. He caused the team to be better. That, my friends, is transformational leadership. But here's what I'm going to tell you. While you can be good at transformational leadership, it is far more effective if you have a solid foundation of servant leadership. What is servant leadership? It is the intentionality of a leader to inspire greatness through relational means. In other words, if we don't develop healthy relationships with those around us, it's going to be far more difficult to be an effective transformational leader. So here's what I'm going to propose a question for you. Maybe you've already asked it. Why are you calling it counterintuitive? Why do you call transformational and servant leadership counterintuitive? Well, there are 7 competencies that define these two leadership styles, one of which is empathy. So let's use that as a quick example. Empathy is not natural to human nature, nor is any of the other competencies that flow from these two leadership styles. They are not natural to human nature. Now, maybe you're sitting here thinking, gee, that's a pretty bold statement. How can you prove that? Well, let's just toy with this for a second. It all goes back to this right here. My wife and I have 3 children. My oldest is 30, my youngest is 23, and we've got a daughter in the middle. I remember when she was pregnant with our first. We were in great anticipation. We could not wait for this precious little life to come into our world. We were going to be happy. We were going to be joyful. It was just going to be blissful. And then this happens. If you have children, you know how this goes. The kid is crying, the baby's throwing a fit, and you're doing everything that you can. Now, this is not my child. This is a photo I bought off the internet, but this speaks to a larger truth. For those of you that have children, I would be willing to bet that you have had your child throw a fit when they didn't get what they wanted, or your child lied to you to protect themselves. This is what they call the primordial law of self-preservation. It goes all the way back to just human nature. Now, here's the thing. I would be willing to bet that none of you ever sat down and talked to little Jilly here, whatever this little girl's name is, and said, now listen, if you don't want to get in trouble, all you have to do is lie to me and you won't get grounded. Or if you don't get that cookie before dinner, if you just throw a fit, I'll give you the cookie. No one does that. We know these behaviors all by ourselves because of this primordial law of self-preservation. And so what happens is we come through our adolescence and through our youth and into our adulthood. And for some people, they never really learn to think outside themselves. There are leaders who walk among us who never really learn how to put other people before them in order to create a loyal, committed, and effective team. These leaders are out there. They simply just dig their heels in and they only think of themselves. These are the people that we want to help. These are the people that we want to develop, and hopefully they would have the wherewithal to be able to change. So here's what I'm going to do. When I talked about servant leadership as being a foundation, I want to build a little cartoon house. If you'll just humor me for a little bit, I want to unpack these competencies. So I'm going to try to zip through these pretty quickly with the understanding that at the end, you'll have my contact information and feel free to reach out to me. But we're going to put a foundation in. And for a foundation, you got to have some pillars. The first pillar of our structure is going to be empathy. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy says, hey, your situation's terrible. I'm here for you. Give me a call if you need me. Empathy is the ability to feel the pain of another. And one of the things that I think is true enough about leadership is the higher up the ladder we climb, the more prone to forgetting about those entry-level pains and struggles that exist within a followership role. Empathy is the ability, that's the bridge that crosses that 79% chasm. It's the bridge that causes the leader to get right into the mix of people who are struggling. And it causes the follower to trust the leader just a little bit more. This is a leader that followers would say, she gets me. I would walk off the ends of the earth with this leader because she just gets me. But the only way that we can make this effective is if we master what we call assuring leadership. Now, the synonym to assuring is inspiration. And when we look at the personality structure, that sanguine, charismatic individual, they could really struggle with a true form of assuring leadership because they are so inspirational. But here's what I would tell you. We always challenge people to not look forward when it comes to inspiration. In other words, telling somebody, don't worry, the sun will come up tomorrow. This too shall pass. Tomorrow's a new day. Because when somebody is in a professional slump, when somebody is just fallen into a place where they're just not productive, two things begin to happen in the psyche of their own mind. One is they begin to doubt themselves. I shouldn't be here anymore. Maybe I should just quit. Maybe I should just move on. And the second person they begin to doubt is the leader. If that's you, they think that tomorrow morning they're going to come in and they're going to get their walking papers. An assuring leader with true empathy would come up to that worker and say, listen, I just want to remind you of the value that you bring to this organization. I know you're struggling right now, and I want to be the resource to help you come out of this slump. But the first thing I need you to hear me say is that this problem that you're in right now does not define you as far as I am concerned. You are still valuable to this company, and I am here to bring you out of this. Man, that is magic. It's not to say that they're going to come in tomorrow and go automatically back into a heightened level of productivity, but it helps. It's a lot better than some of the leaders we work with that come along and say, hey, I know you're going through a hard time, but you got a job to do while you're here. And while you're here, you need to do your job or somebody else will. That never works. It just never works. The final pillar we're going to put in the ground on our foundation of servant leadership is what we call spiritual leadership. We call it spiritual leadership because there's 4 characteristics that the leader, his or herself, has to do some soul searching. Look within yourself and decide, where am I on the spectrum of emotional intelligence, integrity, accountability, and responsibility? Now, I'm not going to go too deep into integrity, accountability, and responsibility, other than to say integrity obviously is doing the right thing even when no one is looking. Accountability is how comfortable are people to come up to you and say, hey, I disagree with you, and then have an intelligent professional conversation about that. Or the responsibility of not blaming other people for our own mistakes. These people walk among us. But what I do want to talk about is the emotional intelligence aspect of servant leadership. And the greatest example of this is, I would say this, and when I say this statement, this is what catches a lot of people's attention, and I get a lot of feedback, both good and bad. But I will say this, as a leader, you don't get to have a bad day. We get to check our emotions at the door. We get to come into work because you chose that leadership position. And because you chose that leadership position, we get to check our emotions at the door and become for our followers what they need us to be, because their lives are falling apart too. Here's the greatest example. If you remember the movie Titanic, there's a scene in the movie where the ship is sinking. We all know that's the essence of the movie. But on the deck, as everybody is scrambling for the boats and trying to save themselves, there's an orchestra that's playing. And at one point, the orchestra decides that they've finished their piece and they begin packing up their instruments. Well, one guy decides he's going to keep playing. That inspired the rest of the musicians, and they all began to continue to play. I challenge every one of you to go back and watch that movie and tell me if your stress level doesn't come down as you're watching this scene unfold. Here's the thing about emotionally intelligent people. They understand how to bring a calming presence to an already tense situation without making it worse. The greatest leaders among us will check their emotions at the door, and they become sacrificial for the people to bring a calming presence. Now, that's our foundation of servant leadership. And once we get that solid foundation laid, the sky is the limit on where we can build. So let's put some walls in this structure. The first wall for our transformational leadership is what we call decisive leadership. Now, decisiveness is discussed as a two-edged sword. The first edge of this sword is what we call PDT, a personal data threshold. Everybody in this room has a PDT, a personal data threshold. It simply means that you know what you know and you don't know anything more. The problem with every one of our PDT is that there are experiences outside of the circumference of our PDT that we have not engaged in yet. There's challenges, opportunities, victories, threats, and all kinds of things that our PDT cannot inform, which takes us to the second edge of the sword that I call the Rush philosophy. And I have to admit that I have stolen this title from a band called Rush, who wrote a brilliant lyric a number of years ago. And they wrote this: if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Well, it begs the question, what then did we decide? If in our decision-making process of our professional lives, we encounter something that our PDT cannot inform, then most people would say, well, we're not going to make a decision on that because we want to avoid disaster. And I would push back against that and say, I think if you choose not to decide because your PDT cannot inform it, then you have chosen to avoid victory. You have chosen against success. And the reason why I say that is this. Behind my camera is a wall of books. I have an extensive library. I'm kind of a hard copy guy. And in these books somewhere is this story that tells about a CEO who was appointed to a business that was not doing well. But through collaboration and teamwork, they started to come out of the slump and started to enjoy some success and prosperity. One of the board members comes to the CEO one day and says, what is it about you that your touch seems to turn things to gold? And his response was, make right decisions. And his partner said, well, I get that, but how do you know what right decisions are? And he said this, because prior to me coming to this company, I have spent years making the wrong decisions. You see, our greatest lessons are not learned through victory, they're learned through failure. And one of the things that we have to do as leaders and as professional business people is to embrace failure. Victory is few, failure is abundant. And it's through those failures that we learn our greatest lessons. So let's move on to the second wall of our transformational leadership level. And that is creative. Now, if you looked at your report, for those of you that took it, you saw this creative competency. It's a bit of a misnomer. We're not measuring your personal sense of creativity. We're actually measuring your openness to other people's creative ideas. In other words, collaboration. How well does the leader collaborate with other people? Here's what's fascinating about the competency of creativity. This study is a bit dated, but this is the quote that I'll have for you. Prior to 2020, there was a study that came out that said by the year 2020, businesses are going to have to possess heightened levels of creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. Now, here's what's interesting about creativity. When it comes to the difference between extroverts and introverts, introverts possess a higher level of personal creativity. The reason for that is because they have a sense of checking out of the chaos of the world and allowing their brains to get rested and defrag, so to speak. Extroverts, we are always on the go. Our minds are always running. We take problems home with us. We lay in bed trying to solve problems and come up with solutions. Now, here's the problem with us extroverts, and I speak as a fellow extrovert. We don't like your ideas. We like our ideas. That's the problem with extroverts, is if we are left unchecked, everything that we do for problem solving will flow from our solutions. And eventually the followers are going to look at us and go, wow, he's a dictator. It's his way or the highway. So if I'm going to be a counterintuitive leader who is a strong extrovert, I need to be willing to listen to the ideas of those around me and implement those ideas and cause people to feel valued and empowered. An empowered team is a team where the leader just brings people together and says, hey, we've got a problem. We need a solution. Go around the room instead of me saying, here's the problem. Here's my solution. Now I want to know what you think. Let me tell you a quick story about empowering. I had a guy reach out to me a couple of years ago, call me to his office, and I went to his office and he said these words: I want you to help me build my empire. That word kind of struck me as a little odd. And so I said, I'd like to change that word, if you don't mind, to helping you build your legacy. He said, well, tell me what you mean by that. And I said, well, here's what I think. I think businesses will never reach the level of success that they need to be at or should be at unless they are willing to empower their people in such a way that they run the risk of losing them. That's how we become successful. His words to me was, I would never empower my people to that point. I would never be okay with them going off and joining my competition or starting my competition. We had a nice conversation, and I left, and I knew that is not a guy I want to work with. I want to work with a leader who understands that great organizations have empowered organizations who fan the flame of creativity, and they're willing to lose in order to win. The final wall that we'll put in our house of transformational and servant leadership is visionary. Visionary leadership is a very powerful thing. And I'll tell you my personal experience. Back in 1994, I was a press operator for a fiberglass company in Northeast Ohio. We made sleeper cabs for Freightliner trucks. My job was to pump out 98 parts a day. And I will tell you that if you've ever been in a fiberglass company, it's nasty, hot, itchy, miserable. I mean, you're creating parts that you don't even recognize it because they're not put together. Well, the engineers had created this process called in-mold coating, and it simply allowed Freightliner to skip the primer part of the painting and go right to paint because we put this rubberized coating on it. Well, because I worked so closely with the engineers, they pulled me out, put me in HR, and I developed curriculum for this process for all three plants and all three shifts. As a part of this, they flew me to Mount Holly, North Carolina, to the Freightliner plant. As I was there, I saw the parts that came in from Northeast Ohio with my employee number written on the inside of these. It changed my perspective of my job. Now I realized that I wasn't making these blank, characterless parts. I was creating a truck. And my goal, my job is, if you needed a package delivered to your house, I was literally at the beginning stage of building that truck. It changed my perspective. I can't speak to everybody else that was on that trip, but I know for me, this company had the wherewithal to send us down there to see this thing happening, and it changed me. Leaders have to be creative enough in their leadership to empower their people, fan the flame of their creativity, and give them a vision that helps them understand that you are changing the world. You're changing the world in the job that you do. You're not just crunching numbers. You're not just selling this or selling that. You're changing the world. Well, now I want to get to the results of your assessment. When we work with our clients on a one-on-one basis, we use a scientific research process called triangulation and qualitative research. We're essentially measuring your personality in leadership, your philosophy of leadership, and ultimately your practice in leadership. And here's what it looks like. Our product is called SCAN. It stands for Skills Analysis. And if you took the assessment and you got your results back, one of the graphics that you saw was this one. You know, you'll recognize the four temperaments here: the melancholy, phlegmatic, sanguine, and choleric. Now, I will tell you right off the bat, we put numeric values to introversion and extroversion. And to me, these numbers are a little too tall. We like to see these down around 5, because the stronger this graphic, the weaker the competency graphic. They're working against each other. So what we're looking at here is something that's very interesting about sociological studies. Sociological studies tell us that melancholy and choleric are what they call social extremes. They're in the minority. They're single-digit percentages of our population. If you are a extroverted choleric, if that's your dominant personality behavior, then you're rare. You're unique. You're probably worth something. And so too with the melancholy. But I will say this: that these two temperaments, are the most misunderstood of all 4 temperaments. They can be, the choleric can be, let's say, how do we say this? Can be misinterpreted as being a bully, being a dictator, And the melancholy could be misinterpreted as being uncaring and just dragging their feet and not concerned about deadlines. These two in the middle, the phlegmatic and sanguine, are the largest the largest demographic of our population. And I can promise you that they're easier to read, they're less misunderstood. And so what we like to see is if somebody is going through our coaching program, we're going to work over the course of time to minimize these behaviors and maximize these. This is your competency graphic. Now here's your servant and transformational leader and all of the competencies underneath that define them. What we like to see is an overall score of 5.0. Now, here's what I would tell you. Look at this individual's empowering. This is a score of 3 out of 7. The maximum you could get for spiritual leadership is 8 because there were 50 scenarios in it, and there were 7 for each of these and 8 for this one. I don't know if that's my OCD that won't just let me have 49 scenarios in the assessment, so 50 total. But I will tell you this, that while this person did pretty good and their empowering is low, if you're looking at your graphic and you're seeing some of these competencies being low, I know that your first emotional reaction is going to be, wow, I must not be very good at this. That's not what this assessment tells you. In fact, what it tells us is this third graphic gives us identifiable patterns of behavior whereby we can recognize which personality behavior is actually interfering with those competencies. So what you're looking at here is your transformational and servant leadership styles with the 4 aggregates for transformation and 3 for servant leader. These numbers represent the scenarios in the assessment assigned to visionary and so on and so forth. Now take empathy, for example. This person 3 times out of 7 responded with the introverted, phlegmatic, transactional compromise for empathy. Now, I can tell you that this is this person's attempt to show empathy. And while that may be felt as empathetic as they're compromising and trying to help this person, one of the things that we would say is unless you're exercising the truest form of empathy, there's a high probability that you're enabling people and not actually causing them to work through their problems and create a better leader out of them. One of the things that we see over and over and over again is we can equate leadership to some medical instruments. So you take a scalpel versus a healing balm, a soothing balm. If I have a 2nd-degree burn, that soothing balm is going to feel good. If I've got heart disease, I need the scalpel. Both of these instruments seek to heal. One hurts and the other one feels good. Unfortunately, there are too many leaders that want to use a scalpel on everything and some leaders that want to use a soothing balm on everything. We have to know the application. And in these identifiable patterns of behavior, we can look and see where a person is probably not necessarily helping an individual to become the best version of themselves, but ultimately causing the individual to remain in where they are. So as Christy had mentioned earlier, I have 2 books that I've written on the subject. The latest one is The Chameleon Effect, Counterintuitive Leadership. You can get a copy at barnesandnoble.com. And my first book, which was a product of my dissertation, is called Leadership Equilibrium. Both of these books deal with effective leadership, and I would encourage you to, if you're looking at your report and you're still scratching your head and going, I'm not sure really how to read this, then there's 2 things that you can do. You can get the book and read that. You can reach out to me. Here's my contact information right here. That's my phone number. That's my email address. Shoot me an email and we can have a conversation. We'll set up a Zoom meeting and I can walk through your reports. Now, I think there were like 53 of you that actually completed the assessment. So if all 53 wanted to schedule time, just understand the last one in is going to be a little bit down the road, I think. So I just want to say thank you for participating. And for those of you that have not yet taken the assessment, it's not too late. You still have the invitation. You can take it and I'll send the results to you. So anyway, I think that's my time. And I just want to, I guess, turn it back over to Tina and or Christy. And we'll just leave it at that, I suppose.
All right. Thank you, Mike. That was quite impressive. A lot of information. I'm sure we have a ton of questions. Who has questions they'd like to just unmute yourself and come on in?
I don't have have a question, but I have a comment. I appreciate you putting it into context because I feel like as a leader, aspiring leader, and a person who has been led by people I like and don't like, this helps me put it into context a little bit better. Also, I can see it translating into how I want to put that into words for my next whatever step in my career too, because I feel like it's really helpful to be able to also communicate to other people in a way that is relatable. And so I really appreciate you doing that.
Well, and you sparked a thought in my mind. And for those of you that are looking for employment and did take the assessment, I can guarantee you that any of those 7 competencies are something that an employer is looking for. So if you scored good, if you scored, I don't know if that's effective grammar. If you scored gooder on any of those competencies, take that to your interview and just say, I'm skilled with decision making. I'm skilled with whatever the case might be. They'll be impressed with that.
Hey, Mike, David, good morning. I was curious, just really briefly, you opened up with the 79% mistrust figure. What is it? What areas of trust does that translate to? Employees don't think the manager has their back. They're gonna, I mean, I'm stunned at that figure from my own experience as a manager for many, many years.
Yeah, so was I. Now, I will tell you this, that I have a colleague of mine who was a part of a university out in Kansas, and he had conducted a study that dealt with why middle managers don't trust upper managers. And one of the things that he came out with was that middle managers fear being honest enough with their leader that they may seem weak and not worthy of promotion down the road. So they just they fail to share their struggles because they don't trust the leader enough to not use that against them down the road. That was one study that was conducted. Now, this one that come from Gallup.com, there was another one that I had read from Forbes, and those simply said that it's a failure to effectively communicate. When we lead from what is natural to ourselves and we alienate people who are contrary to us, that does not bring people together. It simply creates a lack of trust whereby the follower says, not my kind of person. And that's just true for sales and, whatever the case may be. So I don't think I really doubt that statistic has to do with people thinking that you're just a tyrant or that you are, you lack integrity. It really, all the studies that I've read come back to a lack of relationship. Thank you for that, David.
I think it can go the other way too, that if you have an extremely competent employee, they are mindful that the boss is going to view them as a threat.
I agree.
It is definitely implied in all that stuff. And I feel that even amongst those who aren't my technical bosses. So it's, sadly, how do you get it?
I think Chris here, I think it boils down to the process as well. Like the process for senior leadership is we're going to go into a closed door meeting. We're going to put together a strategy, and then we're going to bestow that strategy upon our middle management and our team. And they come out and they don't involve the team. So I think the process of non-transparency is what leads to it a lot, at least in the corporate environment.
Totally agree with that, Chris. And one of the things that I find is that organizations fail to recognize the impact zone of whatever changes or strategies that they're implementing. In other words, they'll come out with a solution to a problem, and they never really brought in the people who this solution is going to affect or whom the problem is affecting. So if we can identify the impact zone and bring some key people in there, mind you, keeping in mind that there are non-titled leaders in every group, highly influential people that don't carry a title. And if we can recognize them, bring them in and invite them to be a part of the solution, I don't think the buy-in is necessary. I think the buy-in has a lot of traction, but if we have to get the buy-in from a particular team, then I don't think they were involved enough in the solution process.
Yeah, we call those in sales the mobilizers. Identify the mobilizer in each group.
There you go. That's good.
Dr. Mike, this is Cheryl. So if you walk into an organization that there's a lot of change going on and people within the organization have a lot of personal change and they won't even begin to have a relationship with you as the new leader because they just have this lens in front of them, how do you get past that if they won't even let you in?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to tell people is I'm kind of a UFC fan, if you know what that is, Ultimate Fighting Championship. And you know, I've watched these guys who are they're on the ground and one guy's on top of the guy on the bottom and they're grappling and fighting. I've seen the guy on the bottom win these matches from time to time because he was skilled at wrestling from the bottom. Now, using that analogy, I would just say when we master these effective communication skills that define transformational and servant leadership, we can, in fact, change the behavior of a leader above us. Now, let me just say this, there's no silver bullet because there are people out there that absolutely will dig their heels in. And that's probably a leader who isn't going to last very long. But if everybody in the organization collectively said, we're going to improve our communication and relationship, then you will see people at middle manager levels change the demeanor and character of one above them, because eventually, you know, behavior that isn't good and effective becomes shameful in a group of people whose behavior is, generally speaking.
Actually, I was going the other way. So I was the new leader and I had employees that were going through significant change. One had just gone through a major divorce. Her child was not going to school. My other employee, her father had just died and she was getting married. And they wanted no part of anybody new. And I mean, they wouldn't even give me the time of day.
Yeah, that's tough. And I will tell you that there are several different factors that come into this, and one of those is some of the things that we've all known, and that is that sometimes people like that dig their heels in, they could be the rock star of the organization, and it becomes very hard. But people who absolutely refuse to be relational, I can guarantee their future in the organization is limited.
We have a couple
Mike,
questions in the chat. Real quick.
There are a couple questions in the chat, yeah.
Meredith would like to know, can we get a copy of the questions? I want to compare my answers to learn what a better approach might be. Does that make sense?
So is there a way that I can get a copy of all these and I can deal with them once this is over? Because I know it's going to take some time to.
Sure.
Yeah,
I need a mask.
I think she's asking about the questions on the assessment.
Okay.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Now that I have my answers, I'd like to go back and see where I was.
No, I don't
how I
want to.
responded as compelling.
I don't want.
Okay.
That's possible.
Let me think about that. Our software doesn't necessarily let me print these things out. Generally, when we go through a coaching program, the questions and responses that you didn't answer optimally to are worked into a SWOT matrix, and those are what we develop. But let me see if I can figure that out. If nothing else, if you just want to schedule time with me beyond this, more than happy to do that, and I can share my screen of the software and show you that a little bit easier than trying to print it off and email it to you.
Okay, that's perfect. I'll just email you then. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Meredith. We have another question from Tina. Is there any of this that is different based on gender?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think that studies will tell us that females are probably more in touch with the emotions and the feels than males are. And so it might be a little bit harder for males to get into the what I would call the intimacy of professional relationships. And trust me, I deal with male leaders all the time. And when we start talking about empathy and assurance and all of those things that are in the relational aspect, I see males generally struggling with that a little bit more than females, because, you know, we're guys, I guess, you know, and so I think that there is a bit of a gender gap when it comes to this. But, you know, for the most part, I find very few real hard managers that would just say, I'm not here to win popularity contests. I get people to be productive and that's it. I find few of those.
All right. Thank you, Tina. One more question in the chat. Lori wants to know, what if the CEO is a bully? How do you survive and thrive?
All right. I have a staple response to a question like that. And it is this: you do your best to be better, rise above, but you probably noticed that I've got a little bit of biblical background in my life, and from the Old Testament, David was told that he would be king one day, but Saul was still king, and Saul wanted to kill David. And David was told, you do not lay your hand on the king. And so I've adopted that philosophy, and I've told people down throughout the years, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is your boss is the boss and you are not. You have two choices: get behind him or get out. And that's a hard, if that boss absolutely will not change and you come in daily miserable, stressed out, you have to do better for yourself. But I do think that a good-natured person who just treats a person differently will affect that individual and cause them to be just a little nicer to you. A soft answer turns away wrath. Grievous words stir up anger.
Dr. Mike, there were two other earlier questions. One was about, what if the enemy is type A and condescending to you?
Yeah, I think that there has to be a time when hard conversations happen during peacetime, not during wartime, but to be able to approach that individual, leader or otherwise, and sit down and just say, hey, I want to talk with you about a thing. And I have a whole training called the 5 Steps to Conflict Management using the acronym PAUSE, P-A-U-S-E. Prepare your mind, assume the best, understand first, seek a solution, and finally evaluate. And those are how we have hard conversations for people that are just being offensive. And it causes you to be the bigger and better person.
And the other question was regarding the Myers-Briggs definitions of extroversion and introversion being different from what you shared. Can you comment a little bit about that?
And I will comment very tactfully as best I can. Myers-Briggs is known to be one of the most invalid personality assessments out there, but oddly enough, they are the most popular. The creators of Myers-Briggs was a mother and a daughter, and they had no background in psychology. They had no experience whatsoever. They simply built this product based on their friends and family experience. And lo and behold, it became one of the most popular ones out there. But to me, the Myers-Briggs is much like a fortune cookie. It's vague enough to fit everybody, but the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I'm saying this as an echo to Professor Adam Grant from Wharton University that would say that is probably the lowest personality assessment out there to be valid.
Great. Thanks for sharing that.
All right. Well, I think we are out of time. Oh, Russ, you have a question. What does relational really mean? I've seen it misused.
Yeah, relational to me just simply means looking at people who you like. Obviously, people that we like, those are easy relationships, but the people that we struggle with, not seeing them as the enemy, but seeing them as the victim of some other problem that's happening in their lives, and doing our best to not assume that they're attacking us, but to try to see them as a victim, or they're struggling with something, and help them so that we can draw closer to them. As Sun Tzu said, it's easy to love people that are like us, but hard to love people that are against us. So that makes it very challenging. So
because I've seen it used as a means to control or not deliver on what that person is asking for, and frankly, give them a big middle finger without really actually doing so.
And I truly think that those motives are fairly obvious. When somebody is trying to build a relationship out of manipulation and control, I don't think that's very stealthy whatsoever.
Right. I agree.
Well,
thanks.
Thank you, Russ. All
You're
right,
welcome.
Dr. Mike, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and sharing
Thank
the
you.
assessments with everyone. That was really value add. We will send out an email with the link to the recording and a recap of this meeting, as well as Dr. Mike's his list of books and his contact information. And we'll see you all on December 1st. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr.
Bye,
Mike.
everyone.
Happy
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.